At the end of a seemingly endless afternoon, the Paris General Hospital was overcrowded. Nurses and doctors rushed through the corridors. Nervous voices filled the atmosphere, and the sounds of machines monitoring the patients created a disturbing background noise. Amid the hustle and bustle and the routine of the people working there, no one noticed that a small, thin, scruffy street dog had entered through the main entrance. He walked slowly, with a tired look in his eyes and an old worn-out blanket in his mouth. The attentive visitors tried to shoo him away, muttering that a dog had no place in a hospital, but the animal seemed unfazed. Some of the staff looked at him curiously, while others simply saw him as another nuisance. Pierre, one of the security guards patrolling the lobby, frowned as he saw the dog heading toward the corridors. Determined to resolve the situation quickly, he strode toward him. "Hey, little one, get out of here," Pierre commanded, trying to wave the dog away. But the dog stood firm, his eyes fixed on Pierre with an unusual gleam, something that seemed to blend desperation and determination. Pierre hesitated for a moment, almost instinctively bending down to take a closer look at the animal. That's when he noticed what the dog was clutching so tightly. It was a blanket, yes, but something about it seemed to give it a different significance, as if this old piece of fabric held a secret. Pierre blinked uncertainly. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. As Pierre stepped back, trying to understand what the dog was doing there, a young nurse named Sophie observed the scene from a distance. While the hospital was in full swing, she was busy with a stack of medical records, but something about the dog's demeanor caught her attention. He held onto the blanket with impressive determination, as if his life depended on it. She glanced at Pierre, who still seemed torn between shooing the dog away or leaving him alone, and decided to intervene. Slowly she approached, trying not to startle the animal. "Pierre, what's going on?" Sophie asked in a calm voice, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. The guard scratched his head, visibly uncomfortable. "This dog, he just showed up out of nowhere with this old blanket. I don't know what he wants, but he won't leave." Sophie crouched down and observed the dog closely. The animal's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her forget where she was for a moment. It was a heavy gaze, as if he were conveying a desperate message only she could understand. Carefully, she reached out her hand, and the dog held her gaze, though he hesitated. "Hey, little friend," Sophie whispered, trying to soothe him. "What are you trying to show me, buddy?" The dog tilted his head slightly, as if understanding her words, and then let the blanket fall at his feet. Sophie looked at Pierre, and then at the frayed blanket, feeling her heart race for no apparent reason. Something told her she had to open it, to unravel what it held with such determination. She took a deep breath, sensing the weight of the moment. She crouched beside the dog, who now watched her silently, as if knowing she would understand the urgency. With slightly trembling hands, she picked up the blanket and began to slowly unroll it, pulling at each fold with a mix of fear and haste. The frayed fabric revealed something hidden, a small, fragile figure. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that with each layer she removed, the temperature of the body beside her seemed to drop, and the heavy silence in the hall became even more unbearable. Finally, the last fold came loose, and there lay a newborn baby. It looked still and pale, wrapped in the cold, dirty blanket. "My God," Sophie murmured, her voice almost a whisper of disbelief. She gently placed her finger on the baby's neck, searching for a pulse, a sign of life. The breathing was weak, almost imperceptible. Pierre, standing frozen beside her, could only stammer, Is it a baby? How?" But Sophie couldn't wait any longer. Her adrenaline surged as she lifted her head and shouted through the hall, "I need a doctor, now! Please hurry." Her voice broke through the noise and caught the attention of everyone present. Within seconds, a team of doctors and nurses arrived, quickly and precisely examining the baby. Sophie stayed by the dog's side, who now watched her with impressive calm, as if knowing he had fulfilled his mission by bringing her to the baby. Dr. Laurent, one of the on-duty doctors, checked the baby's vital signs and gave quick instructions. "Let's get him to the neonatal intensive care unit. He's hypothermic and dehydrated. Prepare the necessary equipment." Sophie nodded, her heart pounding as she watched the team rush the baby to the emergency room. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Pierre, visibly shaken. "What do you think happened here, Sophie?" he asked, still trying to process everything. She looked down at the dog, who remained calm and watchful by her side. "I don't know, Pierre, but somehow he knew we had to find that baby." As the baby was taken to the ICU, Sophie stood motionless in the lobby, her gaze still fixed on the dog, who now sat quietly as if waiting for something. The sounds of the hospital and the voices around her seemed to fade away, and in that moment there was only her, the dog, and the strange bond that seemed to connect them. After a few minutes, Dr. Laurent returned to the lobby, his expression revealing the gravity of the situation. Sophie approached him anxiously, eager for news. "Will he be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Laurent sighed and hesitated before answering. "His condition is serious, but we've managed to stabilize him for now. A few more minutes under those conditions and he wouldn't have made it." Sophie felt a mix of relief and fear. She looked at the dog and, without thinking, bent down to stroke his head. "You saved a life today, you know that?" she murmured with a gentle smile. The dog looked up at her, his eyes expressing a depth that seemed almost human. She stroked his scruffy fur as Pierre approached again, now less suspicious and more curious. "What now?" "What do we do with him? We can't just let him roam around," Pierre said. Sophie frowned thoughtfully. "I'll take care of him, at least until we figure out where he came from and what happened." That evening, Sophie decided to spend some time with the dog before leaving. They sat side by side on a bench outside the hospital in a quiet corner. The dog, whom she now called Max, settled beside her as if this new companionship were the most natural thing in the world. He rested his head on her lap, and she stroked him while trying to make sense of the unlikely sequence of events that had unfolded that day. "You know, Max," she whispered to the dog, gazing out at the city lights, "if you hadn't shown up, that baby wouldn't have made it." Max looked at her with that same deep gaze, and in that moment, Sophie had the strange certainty that he understood every word. 3 months had passed since the night Max appeared at the hospital carrying the blanket with the baby. Since then, Sophie's life had completely changed. She adopted Max and brought him to her small apartment in an old Parisian neighborhood. The dog, who had once been a stray on the streets, now had his own spot by the window, where he would spend hours watching the city and soaking up the sun. The routine between the two soon became a source of comfort for Sophie. On her days off, she and Max would stroll through the parks of Paris, and he accompanied her everywhere with impressive loyalty. Whenever they passed the hospital, he would tug at the leash as if he had a special connection to the place where his new life had begun. Sophie took him to the vet, tended to his health, and showered him with the affection one would give a longtime friend. Despite the bond she had developed with Max, something still lingered in her mind: the memory of that baby. She couldn't stop thinking about him and began visiting him frequently at the hospital, tracking every step of his progress, every tiny smile. With each visit, Sophie felt that the bond connecting her, Max, and the baby was stronger than she could explain. When she returned home, Max seemed to know where she had been. He would wag his tail, sniff her clothes, and recognize the baby's scent, as if considering him part of their little family. During one of these visits, Sophie couldn't resist and asked to hold the baby. The little one was stronger now, his eyes sparkling at the sight of her familiar face. She held him gently in her arms, feeling her heart race, and an idea that had once seemed absurd began to take shape. What if she adopted him? The days passed, and Sophie felt her life irrevocably changing. She continued to visit the baby as often as possible, observing every step of his recovery. But with each encounter, the desire to take him home grew, a desire she didn't even dare share with her innermost thoughts. One afternoon, as she held the baby in her arms and gently rocked him, Sophie noticed something different. He smiled at her for the first time. The smile was small and shy, but it carried an indescribable power. Sophie felt tears welling up in her eyes, and in that moment, she was certain she wanted to be more than just an occasional visitor. She wanted to be his mother. When she returned home that evening, Max greeted her with the same excitement as always, but something in his behavior seemed more alert. He sniffed Sophie's clothes more intensely, as if searching for the baby's scent, and then followed her to the couch where she sat quietly, lost in thought. Max climbed up beside her, snuggling gently against her leg, offering the silent comfort only he could provide. Max, Sophie whispered, stroking his soft fur, what if we started a family? The three of us, you, me, and the baby. Is that crazy? Max looked at her with a deep gaze as if understanding every word. He snuggled closer, giving her a silent but supportive answer. Sophie took a deep breath and, in that moment, made a decision that would guide her in the coming months. She would do everything in her power to adopt the baby, and together with Max, build the family she had never dreamed of. The road ahead, however, would not be easy. In the following days, Sophie found herself navigating a labyrinth of bureaucratic processes, conversations, and social assessments. Every step was a struggle. Every obstacle tested her resolve. But she was guided by the certainty that this baby was meant for her and Max. Finally, after months of endless bureaucracy and anxiety, Sophie received the news that would change her life forever. It was a winter afternoon when the phone rang, and as she heard the voice of the social worker on the other end, her heart nearly stopped. Ms. Sophie Martel, the voice said firmly but with a touch of gentleness, it is my great pleasure to inform you that the adoption process is complete. The baby is now officially your son. For a moment, Sophie was speechless. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone, and tears welled up in her eyes. Before she could respond, Max, who was standing beside her, seemed to sense the emotions in the air. He began wagging his tail and barking, as if he understood that something special had just happened. Sophie sank to her knees and stroked Max with a radiant smile. We did it, Max. He's ours, she murmured, hugging the dog, who licked her face and jumped around, infected by her joy. That evening, Sophie brought Gabriel, as she now called the baby, to their new home. As she carried him across the threshold of the apartment, she felt a peace she had never known before. Max followed them closely, circling around as if determined to protect the little one at all costs. Sophie laid Gabriel in his makeshift crib in the living room and watched tenderly as Max cautiously approached, resting his front paws on the furniture and leaning his snout close to the baby. Gabriel opened his eyes, but he didn't cry or startle. Instead, he seemed fascinated by Max's gaze, as if recognizing the friend who had saved him before he even knew the world. Sophie knelt beside Max and whispered in a broken voice, "We're a family now, Max. You, me, and Gabriel." Max seemed to understand as he lay down like a faithful protector beside the crib. Sophie watched the scene with tears in her eyes, feeling deep gratitude for the dog who had changed her life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Thanks to our valued viewers, we continue to improve every day. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up.